Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to our special segment here at the OGM, where our great minds are diving into the transformative world of hydrogen solutions. I'm your host, Tina Olivero, and today we're exploring an innovative approach to energy production that promises to reshape the energy landscape. Today, it's all about turquoise hydrogen. May or may not have heard of that phrase before. If you're in the industry, you certainly have. For those of you who are new to the hydrogen industry, this conversation is also for you. So tune in and understand what those mega opportunities are that are coming up. So as the global pursuit of cleaner energy intensifies, companies and utilities are seeking out sustainable alternatives that not only align with their urgent timelines, but also offer scalability and economic viability, and are also unraveling, creating prosperity, I guess, for our companies. And one such company that is budding up among the rest is Modern Hydrogen, and they're providing turquoise hydrogen solutions. So Modern Hydrogen's goal is to drive that transition towards energy that is cleaner and greener for our future. Today, we have a special guest, Mack Hopen, on the show, and Mack is Modern Hydrogen's Commercialization Manager. So welcome to the show, Mack.
Thanks so much for having us, Tina. Don't want to correct you, but Hopen. I like to make sure that people say hope. It's, the thing we all rely on, but thanks for sending a little spotlight our way.
Hopen, thank you for correcting me. Okay, Mack, so you guys are now seen as a world leader in distributed hydrogen technologies, methane pyrolysis and carbon management, and your company's taken on the task of providing practical clean energy solutions using natural gas infrastructure for hard to decarbonize sectors. That's quite a goal. And as from what I understand, the company was founded in 2015 in Seattle, Washington, and it's backed by some very impressive investors like Bill Gates and NextEra Energy, the National Grid, and Northwest Natural. So that's quite an impressive crew of investors.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride we've been on. So like you said, founded in 2015, we're based in Seattle now, but we've got some folks spread out all throughout the US and all throughout the world. We got a couple up in Canada as well, which they like to remind us very often. You Canadians are very proud. It's been a lot of fun. The last few years have been, have that rocket ship type of feeling where we get people begging us for the product. When can we buy it? We need it right now. Can we get it tomorrow? And that's a super exciting place to be in as a young company. So it's been a lot of fun.
It certainly is. And it's certainly a welcome change compared to the slug and the stride of what energy companies are used to dealing with. It's for the first time we have a buyer for a product that's not even produced yet. That's an interesting and very interesting time. So let's talk about turquoise hydrogen. First of all, for people who are not directly in the industry, what is turquoise hydrogen? How does it work with your existing infrastructure? What are the processes? Starting with the basics, could you kind of explain to us how Modern Hydrogen creates turquoise hydrogen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you and I originally connected over our shared discussion of the hydrogen rainbow. And
yes,
you and I have both written about it a little bit, but it's the hydrogen rainbow is meant to talk about the production pathways that hydrogen can come from. Hydrogen can come from a bunch of different feedstocks and processes, and turquoise is meant to be sort of this blend between blue and green. So blue hydrogen is steam methane reforming with carbon capture. So you take natural gas, run it through the water gas shift and make hydrogen, along with a lot of CO2. Blue hydrogen means you capture that CO2. Green hydrogen, as many people know, is electrolysis based. So you run a current through a electrolyzer. It splits water into hydrogen and oxygen. The color wheel isn't great because it's not, it doesn't provide a ton of insight into the actual properties that specifically the emissions intensity of the hydrogen. But for us being in the turquoise space, turquoise is meant to capture a little bit of both of those blue and green worlds. It's got the fossil feedstock of methane. So we use natural gas or renewable natural gas as the source of the hydrogen. But we're more on the greener side from an emission standpoint. The carbon that we produce that is in the methane doesn't ever become CO2. We pull it out as a solid and we put it to use in other things, so it doesn't end up going to the atmosphere. So from that perspective, we're a little bit like blue, a little bit like green, but I think you and I both agree that we're trying to drive away from the color spectrum as much as we can.
Gotcha. So for people who are not in the industry at all, can you sort of, I guess, you and I are used to talking about the different colors of hydrogen and the methane. But when it comes to turquoise hydrogen and you say it, you're converting that to a solid, can you explain that process for people, how you actually do that, sort of take us step by step through
of course.
process?
So methane pyrolysis itself is this really cool process where if you heat things up in the absence of oxygen, they tend to do really cool things. It's been around for a long time. But recently, as we've started to look at how you can rapidly decarbonize, we've realized that methane represents a pretty tremendous opportunity. Today, it is widely used to produce energy, to produce chemicals, and the infrastructure is in place now to move a lot of it around. So methane pyrolysis is the process of heating that methane up that's in natural gas quite hot or running. There are a number of ways to do it. So I should probably start there. Yeah. It's the decomposition of methane in the absence of oxygen. So methane is 1 carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms. And when you provide enough energy to it, it breaks apart into the carbon and the hydrogen being separate. Mm-hmm. If you do that without any oxygen around, that carbon doesn't become CO2. So it doesn't become a gas and it remains a solid, which can be really helpful in a lot of different ways. It's a lot easier to handle a solid. It's a lot easier to do things with a solid than with a gas.
Right.
So that's effectively what we're doing. You can do it a number of ways. You can use plasma torches. You can use microwave plasma devices. You can use heat in a box. You can use catalysts. You can use no catalysts. There's a lot of really cool novel approaches that are starting to get close to reaching the market. And ours specifically is a thermal non-catalytic approach. So we are taking the approach that we're heating this up really hot and letting it break down without any of the catalysts, without any of those high electrical loads that a lot of the other processes would need.
Gotcha. So once it's in that solid form, then, how does that provide you with distinct advantages? What can you do with it? Where do you take it from there?
Yeah, so there's a ton of things you can do with solid carbon. Carbon is an amazing material. As most people know, it's sort of the building block of life on Earth. It's responsible for hydrocarbon fuels. It's responsible for carbohydrates. A ton of foods and chemicals all rely on carbon. Our specific type of carbon is similar to a carbon black, or it's a solid pyrolytic carbon. So there are a number of things you can do with the carbon from methane pyrolysis specifically. You can make tires, you can make rubbers, you can put it into things like asphalt, which is what we're doing with it. We found some pretty amazing applications to sequester that carbon into roadways that not only improve the quality of the roads, it makes them stronger, it makes them more resistant to rutting in hot environments. It makes them less susceptible to UV degradation, and it actually helps municipalities save on costs because they're lasting longer, because the upfront cost isn't as high. You can afford to fill more potholes. You can afford to put more asphalt down. And, any good politician loves being able to pour more roads down.
Yeah. Got it. So can you sort of walk us through the technologies specifically that you utilize at Modern Hydrogen and how that process, like if we, shine spotlight on that and show us what your methodology is in terms of your production?
Yeah, I'll do as best I can without my intellectual property team getting too mad at me. But we are a young company, so we're trying to be as cautious as we can because we do have a different approach than most folks, and there's a lot of eyes that are fairly curious. So the simple sort of breakdown of what we do is we are building reaction chambers that heat that methane up quite hot using a combustion system. So it's not too different in a lot of ways than traditional steam methane reformation processes, except that we are not exposing that environment to water or oxygen. And we actually use a recycled portion of the produced hydrogen that we make to drive that reaction forward. So if we make, call it 10 kilograms of hydrogen coming out one side of the reaction, we recycle a portion of that hydrogen back to our combustion system to provide the heat to keep our process going. So it's a really cool and novel approach that allows us to work at smaller scales and in a lot of locations that traditionally you wouldn't see technology like this deployed at. That's part of why when we talk about distributed hydrogen production and distributed methane pyrolysis being a huge value add to the energy economy, the reason it hasn't been done before is because it's pretty difficult. It's difficult to do the process that we're doing, but we've got some really brilliant people that have worked a long time and long hours to make this happen. And our pilots are up and running now and they're working phenomenally. And it's been really exciting to see.
Got it. So if in its simplest form, methane pyrolysis is like you're inputting either natural gas or biogas, right? Enters into the system. And then that methane is heated until it sort of breaks into that solid carbon or hydrogen, I suppose.
Yep.
And yeah. And then they're separated and the carbon is actually removed from the system. If I'm getting this right.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I guess you guys recycle that hydrogen from
we recycle a small portion of what we produce in total, and then the rest of it gets delivered to the end customer for the myriad of applications that you can use hydrogen in, which we can talk about later.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. That's very clear. Thank you.
Thanks for helping me out.
No problem at all. I just say putting pieces of together because it is a complex technical process. Some of the greatest minds on earth are working on this, but to be able to have a conversation and simplify it, just understanding the inputs and outputs is a whole other, thing. So that's what we hope to do here is actually demystify it all. So that's great. Then Turquoise Hydrogen also promises like a novel pathway to cleaner energy without the need for extensive infrastructure overhauls within companies. At its core, it represents a departure from conventional production methods. So it has a different level of efficiency, scalability, and environmental stewardship. So as we get into this whole turquoise hydrogen sector, and how it integrates seamlessly with the existing infrastructure processes for other companies that are looking at this, they must have many considerations as they look at, how do they integrate a hydrogen solution that actually meets both their urgent needs for energy and their future aspirations of energy. So what kind of advice would you have for people who are looking at the gamut of possible solutions, how easily can integrate into their company? I know these things are what you guys specifically have been working on with modern hydrogen. So we're curious to find out what you guys have found as an immediate solution, for integration.
Yeah, Tina, you're exactly right. And it's a problem that I think is often under-addressed is the challenges that a lot of these very large, very important companies have in scaling through the transition. These are folks that have spent millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars developing processes, training people, building hard assets in the ground that they intend to last for 30, 40, 50 plus years. And it's no small feat to snap your fingers and swap all of them over to something brand new or build a whole new transmission system or build a whole new set of infrastructure and train hundreds or thousands of people in a new process. So
precisely
when we set out to design this system in a way that enabled the fastest transition possible, we looked at the world as it was. We looked at what people had in the ground. We looked at how they operated their factories, their facilities, their fueling stations, their municipal fleets. We looked at what they were doing today and said, all right, what is the shortest path to adopting a clean fuel for these folks?
Mm-hmm.
We looked at it from that level because it's one thing to ask them to change to a different type of fuel. It's another to ask them to rip out all of the infrastructure they have in the ground or to build a brand new facility from the ground up and hire or train a whole new set of people. Like those are two very, very different asks. So if we can present them with a solution that is a drop-in replacement or as close as you can get while eliminating 90+% of the emissions that they would be seeing, that's what we want to go build. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to do. So when we think about the natural gas delivery system as we have it in North America, Between the US and Canada, there's about 3.5 million miles of transmission and distribution pipelines that move gas around today. Natural gas as an energy source today is still larger than solar plus wind plus nuclear plus hydro. It moves an incredible amount of energy around.
Right.
And our philosophy has been, look, that is infrastructure that's there, it's been paid for, and it's incredibly capable. So if we can utilize that in a clean manner, if we can just take that carbon atom out of the process at the very last second before it goes out to the atmosphere, isn't that a lot easier than building everything new from the ground up?
Right.
So that's where our systems are intended to live. We want them as close to a burner tip, to a boiler, to a furnace, to a fueling dispenser as they can possibly be. Because, listen, it's a race against the clock that we're all in right now. We don't have the time to triple the electric grid in a 15-year span. We just, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen. There's a lot of obstacles standing in the way. And I would love to say differently, but we've got to try to make do with what we have today and use them as cleanly and as cheaply as possible. So that's what we're all about at Modern, is making sure that people don't have to reinvent the wheel in order to get to that clean energy future.
Right. So it's a tweak in technology transfer as opposed to a complete entire overhaul.
Exactly right. We want people to think about our systems, our boxes, as we call them, as filters at the very end of the gas grid. You can use the gas grid almost as is, and we know people are working on cleaning that up and tightening it up so the leaks are prevented, and we're huge supporters of that. But we want people to think about us as a carbon filter on the back end of the grid. At the very edge of the grid, we're stripping the carbon right out of that gas supply so you can use the great part of it. Methane by molecule count is 80% hydrogen already, and it's just that one little pesky carbon atom that we've got to deal with. So for us, we see our job as removing that carbon atom so people can keep doing the things that they do well and not have to become experts in a whole new set of processes or industries or contracts that they don't do well today.
You're the carbon filter equation, just like a water filter.
That's what we like to think about ourselves as. Yeah.
Got it. Makes so much sense, because right now, world energy demand, which is something a lot of people don't really understand, is like we are in an energy crisis in Europe, and the energy future is very uncertain, especially with the wars and all kinds of different things. I'm here in Newfoundland, and we've had Fortune 500 companies end up on our doorstep. We have wind energy companies setting up. All of this is happening because world energy demand is so high, and we are in an energy crisis. And if we're not going to be able to supply that, everything breaks down, from not just our normal way of life, but starvation and all kinds of really very, very serious effects. So these types of solutions or adaptations or filtering systems, I think, are paramount in the equation for sure.
It's a huge thing that goes understated, is that a lot of these industries that are responsible for significant greenhouse gas emissions are the very ones that keep us all alive. Fertilizer, transportation of food, hospitals, roads and bridges, like all of these things that we depend on. It's impossible for us as a society to divorce ourselves from the things we need to live. And saying, you dirty industry, go clean up. Why aren't you doing it yet? And still consuming the things they produce as if, there's a disconnect there that a lot of people haven't fully grappled with, I think. So what we're trying to do is make sure that people have a tool in their tool belt. We're not going to be the only tool by any stretch of the imagination, but we want to be a tool for those industries that give us the things that we need and keep us churning along as a society to get to that future state. So you asked about advice that I would give to folks. It's sort of centered around, you're going to need a portfolio. There isn't going to be a silver bullet for you. If you're a large company that's got operations all around the world, look at what your local energy mix looks like. Look at what you use. Look at what's cost effective. Look at what's emissions intensive, and try to make sure you can cost effectively and as quickly as possible get to that energy future. There's so many amazing technologies coming out right now that are on the precipice of reaching tremendous scale and having tremendous impact. And I think we're getting to the point where we're almost past this incumbency bias where, we talked to folks a year and a half ago, and they were still learning. They're still asking questions. They're still putting plans together. And 18 months later, the conversation has shifted a lot. those folks have gone and got really educated about all of the different solutions they have for, pick a process in a chemical plant, pick a process in a steel or metals production facility. Like those folks in charge now are well versed in all of the different solutions coming at them. And now it's just a matter of, optimizing for their local resource mix, their workforce, and what they can afford here in the short term to make sure that, they have stuff that they can try and pick and choose after trialing some stuff, which ones work the best, and then go do those a lot more.
Yeah. Well, that's why we chose the name Our Great Minds, because during COVID-19, we saw like a tidal wave. We were just getting press release after press release of all of these companies with new innovation that are working towards, the new energy mix, as you say. And it is the great minds around the world that are coming together with all of these solutions and being able to integrate them. And it's the companies like yours that are easy to adapt into their current methodologies that are they're sort of leading the way and transitioning into this instead of like an entire overhaul, as you say. But sort of I guess you guys had a lot of trials and, you had to sort of have pilot projects happening at first. How did that all start to come to fruition? What were your pilot projects? What kind of clients are you attracting? Who are you working with? How's it going?
Yeah. So the technology commercialization roadmap is a little different for every single type and area and even every individual company. You can find two companies in the same space that have very different paths to commercial success, but ours has been honestly fairly quick. We were founded in 2015, but the pyrolysis work really started in earnest a couple years after that. It was not the original mission and focus of the company, but it was something that they discovered along the way. And, one of those happy accidents that you go, that's interesting.
It's interesting how that happens, isn't it?
I can't remember whose quote it was, so I don't want to butcher it, but it's a quote about the best, most optimistic phrase you can hear in a science or an R&D lab is, that's weird. And that's sort of where our pyrolysis work came about from, is our CTO built the first one in his garage and went, all right, this actually works. So our roadmap, we today have two pilots operating around the U.S., one with a utility in Florida, and then another with Northwest Natural here in the Pacific Northwest with us. Northwest Natural is a gas-only utility. They deliver fuel and energy to about 1.6 million customers throughout the state of Oregon and Washington. Mm-hmm. And they have among the most aggressive decarbonization mandates in the country set by their regulator. So they're looking at all of their options of how do we remain, economically viable? How do we keep the lights on for people? How do we make sure that nobody freezes to death in the winter, while also making sure that, hey, we've got to make sure that we're not emitting carbon dioxide at nearly the amount that we do today. Mm-hmm. So we got in touch with them. I can't remember how long ago now, but probably about 2 years ago, and started the process of, hey, what would a pilot project with you guys look like? And been a lot of meetings, a lot of phone calls, a lot of engineers going back and forth over that time. We had a reactor at that time in our labs that they said, that's fine. If you guys want to build a balance of plant, if you want to build the system to make it operate around that reactor, that's great. We'll take it. So in the scale-up process that we're in right now, those pilots are small compared to what we want to build. They've been in the ground. The Portland one's been in the ground for about four or 5 months now, delivering hydrogen. It's been going great. They're super happy with the results. The carbon that we're taking off of there is actively being sequestered into asphalt projects throughout the U.S. We've got it now in, I think, 6 different states throughout the U.S. and in Alberta as well. So we're not leaving you guys out in the cold.
Well, I think about things like natural gas projects that have been shelved because of possible carbon emissions, or their viability and their carbon consideration. Can you give us any insight into that area? Is there anybody knocking on your door in that regard?
There is, to some degree, and we try to do a good job of understanding the intent of the people asking. If they're asking good questions, if they're sincere if they're not just trying to throw mud or sling mud, like we'll take the time and answer whatever questions they want to hear. And we'll be as transparent as we can be to make sure that they understand that what we're not trying to do is, advance the status quo. We're trying to offer folks a solution that they can implement today. A carbon atom that you emit today is worth more damage to the atmosphere than a carbon atom that you emit tomorrow. The longer it lives up in the atmosphere, the more warming you see. So
right.
we realize that the faster we can get emissions down as fast as possible, the better. And part of that means using the things we've already got in the ground in a clean way. So we're absolutely on board with, we know we've got to eliminate any methane leaks upstream of us. Our largest emissions scope is the things that we're not responsible, that are upstream of us. So whether that's the gathering, the processing, the transmission, we are trying as best we can and working with some great partners to make sure that wherever we put these systems, it's on the cleanest gas we can possibly find. And that's part of the work we're doing with the biogas realm as well. Pyrolysis has this amazing capability, as we've talked about, of pulling carbon out of a gas stream. And when you do that with biogas, you're pulling carbon out of the gas that was originally in the atmosphere, if it's coming from biomass or from dairy farms. So pyrolysis is this amazing tool that, in theory, you can use to what we like to call indirect air capture. There's carbon that we're pulling out and putting into roadways that, a few years ago, before it became grass or before it became corn or, pick your agricultural product, it was in the atmosphere. So
right.
That's something that we make sure we try to highlight with folks that are skeptical of us relying on and using fossil fuels as our feedstock is, hey, look, we know that is an issue. We know that the upstream side needs to be dealt with. And we're going to do our part to make sure that we're not contributing to any gas coming off the grid that's dirty. But hey, we also have this ability that very few, if any, other hydrogen production methods offer, which is you can actively pull carbon from the atmosphere through a collection of processes and put it in the ground in a useful product.
That is the key, isn't it? That's it right there, for sure. So, what can you take it and do other things with it? Like what's else on the horizon can you do with it? And it's like,
yeah,
my mind just thinking about.
It's amazing the amount of things you can do with carbon. And obviously it takes some work and research, and we're working on a number of things right now that I'm not allowed to talk about too closely, but
oh, damn.
I know. I'll talk generally about what you can do with pyrolysis or pyrolytic carbon. So there's some really interesting applications specifically in rubber. Right now, carbon black globally is about an 18 million or so metric ton per year market. 30 to 40% of every tire that you see on the roads is made out of carbon black. The black plastic pipes that you see that go underground to carry water or sewage, they have carbon black in them. Makeup products have carbon black in them. There's a whole printer ink. There's a whole number of pigment products and industrial products that rely on this material. So there's that sort of existing market of carbon black, carbon products that can be, in theory, replaced or added to with these pyrolytic carbons. There's also a lot of work being done, some great work in the ARPA-E pyrolysis program here in the US around graphitic materials and carbon nanostructures. So some of the ways you can do pyrolysis result in some really cool structures coming out of this carbon, whether it's carbon nanotubes, carbon graphene nodules, graphite. There's actually a few companies here in the US that are focused on producing graphite. Graphite's essential for us. We know that it goes into batteries, into semiconductors and superconductors. It's an amazing material that's only going to grow in utility. Yeah. And right now, the vast majority of that comes from very dirty processes involving coal, mostly done in China. So one of the applications that has a huge window of opportunity for it in the pyrolysis space is the production of graphite and those graphitic products.
Yeah, I see graphite as, absolutely the future for sure.
It's essential. There's also some really cool applications that folks are working on over in Europe and over in Asia with carbon materials around water filtration, that it seems to offer a great medium to do specific chemical filtering. So some of those forever chemicals that we hear about that are dirty and nasty and we like to get rid of, some of these carbon products seem to be a great filtration medium to soak those up and hold them forever. There's also some really good work being done in the soil amendment space. So we talk about soil and nutrient retention. And by mixing some of these carbon materials, biochar and certain types and sizes of carbon black into soil, it helps you use less fertilizer, which is obviously great for the environment. It prevents it from running off into streams. So you don't need to use as much, which is less energy. It helps you hold in more nutrients. It helps plants grow better. It's kind of a wonder material when you hear about all the different ways you can use it, from batteries to food production to water. So one of those things we're really excited about over the coming years, is to figure out how else and what else we need to do to our material to get it into as many of those applications as possible.
Yeah, you guys are going to have more trouble trying to figure out what your priorities are than your opportunities.
It's like you've been in a lot of our meetings over the last year and a half. It's focus, focus, focus.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how that's happening. And it is like the Wild West out there right now. Like when I see all of the press releases that come in, all the different things people are working on, I'm thinking, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. How do we harness all of these different modalities and methods and adaptations? And maybe we don't. Maybe we just let it go out into, this free market, and we see all the different ways that, obviously the things that are going to rise to the top. I have my ideas about the things that are going to rise to the top, like you said, graphene, all of those things. But yeah, nobody knows at this point. It's like, it's a big crapshoot.
Exactly. We're all sort of closing our eyes and throwing darts at the board, and a year, 2 years, 4 years from now, we'll open our eyes and take a look and see what hit.
It's an interesting time, that's for sure. Okay, so in terms of scalability prospects, does Modern Hydrogen offer its distributed hydrogen production systems, a scalability model, I guess? And I'm sure there's a lot of challenges associated with scaling up and deployment. Can you give us a bit of insight into that?
Yeah, there are. I'd like to start sort of talking about how a lot of folks are thinking about hydrogen in general, at least here in the US. There's been some recent announcements, some very big announcements from the federal government about these hydrogen hubs. These are sort of centralized locations where they're going to be sponsoring and supporting activity and projects to spur hydrogen production. And that's good. We think that's awesome. We know that that's only a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to get. Hydrogen's a very challenging molecule to move around. It's small, it embrittles metals, it leaks out of a lot of things. It's very volumetrically not very energy dense. So it doesn't compact very well. It likes to take up a lot of space, which makes it difficult and challenging from an energy, from a cost, from an emissions perspective to move around. So we're of the belief that the hydrogen hubs are going to be great as long as you're in a hub or a short drive or short distance from a hub. But if you're not, what are your options? You've got to find a way to get clean fuel. You're probably not going to get a hydrogen pipeline for at least 25 to 30 years, if ever.
Yeah.
It's not very efficient to move hydrogen on trucks. So what options are you left with? That's part of the reason that we've taken the approach that we've done. Is when we talked about the prolific natural gas infrastructure that we have here, you're never far in the US or Canada from a natural gas line. And there's already a lot of hydrogen in those natural gas lines. We'll rip the carbon atom off for you. The scalability question that we talk about all the time, our CTO, Max Mankin, his motto is, we want to build products, not plants. Chemical plants are multi-year design. You do a pre-feed, you do a feed, you do a construction, you do install, you do troubleshooting. They always run over budget. They always run over schedule. And at the end of the day, most folks aren't the happiest until they're a few years removed from the project. So what we want to try to do is make sure that we're not building chemical plants. We want to build products the same way that they do engines. We want a standardized modular container that you can select a few options, and we'll size as many of those as we need to meet your demand. So in theory, if our flagship product, the MH500, that will be turned on for the first time this year, is a 500 kilogram per day or a half metric ton a day of hydrogen output. That is what we have figured out to be about this lowest common denominator of sizes that we see people asking for. So it's usually smaller than what people want if you were to only buy one. But most often, folks that we're talking to don't want 100% hydrogen all at once. If they've got existing processes, say you're a glass company that uses natural gas heat to melt your glass.
Right.
Your equipment and your people and your safety procedures aren't ready to go to 100% hydrogen today. What that
Mhm.
means is if you were to build a chemical plant to make all this hydrogen, you would be going from 0 to 100, and you'd have to switch everything over all at once.
Right.
The approach that we've taken for both scalability, for our manufacturing scalability, as well as customer scalability, is to try to go smaller and modular and size them up as they're ready to take more.
Okay.
So,
Break that down for us. How does that work?
yeah, so the MH500 is roughly a shipping container's size. It'll produce about 500 kilograms of hydrogen a day. And, it's a moderately large daily load for, say, a fuel dispensing station, but it's really small from an industrial perspective. We're talking to customers that need, 10,000, 50,000 kilograms of hydrogen a day to totally decarbonize their processes. And that's a lot.
Yeah.
That is no small feat. And telling them they have to have that all at once or not at all, they look at that and they say, well, then I guess I'm going to have to take not at all because we're not ready for that much. So what we want to do is as they grow more comfortable, as they trust the technology more, as they trust their people and processes and safety equipment more, we want to gradually size them up. If you need, call it 1,000 kilograms to start with, we'll deliver you 2 MH500s. They'll sit in nice shipping containers right next to each other, just short of wherever you need it, and they'll send that hydrogen a short distance. Instead of bringing in a truck every day, instead of, getting a new transformer or substation to put electrically driven methods of hydrogen, you put our boxes right at the end of your gas line. We'll rip the carbon out, send you the hydrogen. And as you're comfortable taking more and more, we'll bring a couple more boxes every 2 months, every 6 months, every year, whatever timeline that may be.
Wow. That's so interesting. That's a major infrastructure whole system that you guys have to build there.
It is. But when you think about the comparison to the alternative is you build a brand new hydrogen pipeline, which, from what we hear, costs anywhere from $3 to $10 million a mile, depending on where you live. Or if you need to install a chemical plant all at once, that's for some of these customers, that's a multi-billion-dollar effort.
Precisely. Yeah. So, yeah, let's shift our focus to the economics of all of this for a second. So, the economic viability
Yep.
compared to, other systems and the competition in the market. Like, can you give us some insight into what else is emerging? What competitiveness is out there, and I guess the economic benefits for companies to consider in this solution.
Yeah. So the economics around hydrogen right now are going to vary a ton by geography, by project size, and by method of production. So
Right.
today in the US, we make about 80 to 90 million metric tons of hydrogen a year, and 98% plus of that is made with steam methane reforming. So what we would call gray hydrogen from the rainbow.
Right.
It produces a ton of CO2, about 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide for every kilogram of hydrogen you make. But it's very cheap. The process has been around for a long time. It's largely used at chemical plants and refineries. It's very inexpensive. You can call it somewhere on the order of $1.50 to $2.50 per kilogram, depending on where you are. When you add in if we need to make the shift towards low emissions hydrogen, whether that be green, turquoise, blue, pink, any of the flavors, the economics start to shift a little bit. We're in the early days of electrolyzer deployment, and you can find prices today anywhere from, call it $3 to $5 a kilogram, to some companies selling it for north of $20 a kilogram, which is a lot. The equivalent, if you were to compare the amount of energy in a kilogram of hydrogen, is about equivalent to the energy in a gallon of diesel. So you can think roughly to displace diesel, ballpark, you've got to get to somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $7 a kilogram is what a lot of folks have told us. That's about where it breaks even because the engines are more efficient when you use hydrogen. So there's a little bit of room there. On the industrial and the power sector supply, they're looking to get somewhere, the break-even price from what they pay today is somewhere in the $2 to $4, maybe $5 a kilogram. So we have a long way to go from some of the incumbent models. And that's, I think, where pyrolysis has this huge opportunity. Because we're able to valorize the carbon coming out of the process. Steam methane reforming, it's a liability. It's carbon dioxide. You either send it to the atmosphere today, which we should stop doing as soon as possible, or you install these large carbon capture systems. Once you've captured that carbon dioxide, it's got to go somewhere. So you can either build, If you're very lucky, you'll be on top of geology that allows you to inject it straight underground. That still requires some pretty intensive capital expenditures to do that. And as of today, there are very few Class 6 wells permitted in the US, and that process has been arduous, is maybe the nicest way to describe it. Otherwise, you've got to put that in a pipeline or on a truck and move it miles, dozens, hundreds of miles to somewhere where you can inject it. And again, there's not many places permitted today to take it.
Right.
So because we're able to valorize that carbon that is a liability for everyone else, the economics end up looking really promising. There's been a number of studies done that show that pyrolysis and electrolysis, depending on the energy costs in that area, look to be the two cheapest ways you can produce hydrogen at scale.
Right. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Interesting. It's going to be so interesting to see how it all pans out, and to see, where your clients are going to come from. Like, when you guys look at the potential market, how do people find out about you?
That's a great question that I try to ask all of them whenever we hear from them sort of out of the blue is, hey, how did you find us?
Yeah.
We're hearing from folks all over the world, and that's been really exciting for us because originally we thought this was, at least at the start, because we're a new technology company, we know that we want to keep our technology within a reasonable flight distance. We've decided to focus on North America. So specifically the US and Canada for these first couple systems, to make sure that as we're learning, as we're growing, it's not too tedious for us to go work on things, to swap in new parts, to try things out.
Yeah.
But we've heard from folks all over the world. We have a number of investors based over in Europe, as well as some in Japan. Japan's an amazing market opportunity because they rely tremendously on, today, LNG imports from largely the US.
Right.
One of our investors in our last round that NextEra mentioned, you mentioned NextEra earlier and National Grid. The other investor that we brought on in that round is a company called Mura Boiler, based out of Japan.
Okay.
They are, by our count, the largest industrial boiler manufacturer in the world. They alone are responsible for something like 2 to 3% of Japan's CO2 emissions. So they have a tremendous footprint, which means they have a tremendous opportunity to help their clients decarbonize.
Yeah.
What they're most interested in with us is pairing our systems directly with their boilers. So they're very excited to be able to offer an integrated solution to sell to their clients, to say, hey, you don't need to install, hundreds of new transformers to take on electrical capacity.
Yeah.
You can keep your gas connection. We'll deliver you a box that removes the carbon and makes the steam all at once. So companies like that are great. We've heard from a number of folks down in South America.
I think we should do a whole show on that once that all comes to fruition, because that is incredible.
It's amazing. And they have some very cool customers. We've been to a number of breweries over in Japan. It certainly makes for a nice show.
Cool. Well, and we're all headed to the World Hydrogen Conference. The OGM is the one of the official media partners for that conference. I don't know if you guys are going to be over there, but if so, I'd love to meet up with you there. And don't forget about Canada. If you guys are creating an expansion up this way, certainly let us know. We're so connected now, being in the industry for 3 decades. There's not too many people we haven't come across or haven't been involved in. So certainly let us know.
Yeah, Canada is a huge market for us because you guys have really, really plentiful natural gas, and it's also really low emissions relative to a lot of other places. You guys do such a great job of being intentional throughout the gathering, processing, transmission of it. So it's a market that we're super excited about. There's a lot of interest.
Cool. Excellent. Okay. Well, that's pretty much, we've almost been talking for an hour here now, which is we're just heading towards finishing it up. But before we did, I wanted to ask you, was there anything else that you wanted to say or anything else you wanted to add for our viewers?
I've been trying to do this recently, that it's, if you spend time around this space, if you pay attention to the news, it's really easy to get bummed out. And I think what I've been trying to do is remind folks that humans are capable of pretty incredible things when we work together and we have a North Star that we're aligned to. And collectively, we seem to all be looking up and finding this North Star in the last few years that, hey, we really need to get this transition underway. It's urgent. It's important. We can do it. It's just a matter of coordinated effort. So the number of folks the circles I've been running in, the conferences I've been going to, the people I talk to on a regular basis just have filled me with so much hope and inspiration and excitement to
Mhm.
like really believe that this is possible. And if you asked me 2, 3 years ago, like, how possible do you think it is to mobilize the capital, the people, the political will to do what we need to do? I would have been a lot more pessimistic. But now seeing the progress that's been made in such a short time, I would just encourage people to keep looking for the bright side. Look for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers used to say.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm always looking at the bright side, and consequently, that's what gets reflected back to me. But we really, really do have, a, such a powerful new energy system pulling us into being. So, looking ahead, the road to scaling businesses with hydrogen is like full, chocker block full of opportunities. And hydrogen emerges as a beacon of hope, um, or Hopen, as Mack would say. And so it's a solution that's not only reduces our carbon emissions, but it offers all of these economic benefits, and it's a global proposition. So today we've seen, the environmental advantages, the economic viability, the integration into existing infrastructure, and the promise that turquoise hydrogen can become um, more and more, it's apparent every day to all of us. So, as we continue to explore turquoise hydrogen, its applications, its benefits, the role of driving the transition towards cleaner energy and alternatives, it's our great minds like Mack of modern hydrogen here today who have illuminated the path forward for all of us. So, thank you so much for being a guest on our show. We really appreciate it.
Of course, Tina. Thanks so much for having me. And if any of your viewers have questions, have no hesitation to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can go to our website and shoot us a note through the contact section, however you prefer.
Great. And we'll have you on as a guest again. Thank you to our viewers for joining us in this enlightening exploration of turquoise hydrogen. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions as we continue to unravel the mysteries and innovation of sustainability in the energy with our great minds all over the world. Until next time, I'm Tina Olivero. Over and out.